There's a verse in the Bible that billionaires, wealthy entrepreneurs, and financial strategists have quietly used for centuries, not to ask God for money, but to understand the mechanics of how wealth actually multiplies. And the crazy part, most people read it and completely miss the hidden principle buried inside. Stay with me for the next 10 minutes, because by the end, you're going to see your financial decisions in a completely different light. You read it on Sunday, the pastor quotes it. Your mentor references it. Proverbs 215. The plans of the diligent lead to profit. You nod. It resonates. You think about becoming more intentional with money, more disciplined, more aligned with integrity. You believe that if you just follow the pattern, study the successful people, avoid the lying tongue, keep your circle right, wealth will multiply naturally. You feel calm. You feel guided. You feel like you finally have the formula. But then you live your actual life. You work the intentional job. You study the successful patterns. You keep your circle tight. And somehow you're still living paycheck to paycheck, still stressed about rent, still watching your peers who seem to have figured something out that you haven't. The math tells a different story. Hi, this is Mark. I'm your guide through the hidden wealth multiplication secrets buried in Proverbs 21. Over the next 10 minutes, you're going to discover how billionaires, entrepreneurs, and financial strategists have quietly used this ancient principle for centuries, not to ask God for money, but to understand the actual mechanics of how wealth multiplies. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see your financial decisions in a completely different light. Here's what nobody says out loud about Proverbs 21. The principles work, but not the way you think they work. And the gap between what you believe is happening and what's actually happening is where most people stay trapped. Let's start with the core promise. Proverbs 21:11 says the simple gain wisdom. By paying attention to the wise, the foolish get knowledge. This is being sold to you as a wealth principle. And it is, but here's what's missing. Wealth in the biblical sense and wealth in your actual bank account are not the same thing. When Proverbs was written, there were no income taxes, no payroll taxes, no state taxes, no healthcare deductions, no 401k allocations. There was no cost of living index adjusted for geographic location. There was no student loan debt. There was no inflation eating your savings at 3% per year. The pattern recognition principle is real. Studying successful people is real. Integrity compounds, that's measurable. But these principles exist inside a modern economic structure that was never accounted for in the original text. So let's look at what actually happens when you apply these principles inside 2024. You make $65,000. That sounds like a statement. Wealth. Someone tells you that's enough to build Sukarite. You believe it because Proverbs is true. If you're diligent, if you're intentional monthly, that's $5,416. But after federal income tax at your bracket, $4,217. After payroll taxes, Social Security and Medicare, $3,821. After state income tax, let's say you live in New York, $3,401. You've lost $2,015 before you even see your pay check, before rent, before food, before anything. Now you see the first crack. Your benefits come out: health insurance, $200, dental, $25, vision, $15, 401k contribution. You're being intentional, following the diligent pattern, $325. That's another $565. New number, $2,836. Rent in any mid-sized city where jobs exist, $1,400 to $1,800. Let's say $1,500. Groceries for one person. Eating reasonably, $250 to $350. Call it $300. Car payment. If you need reliable transportation for work, $350 to $450. Call it $400. Or if you don't have a car payment, car insurance is $100 minimum, plus gas at $150 a month. So far, $1,500 rent, $300 food, $400 transportation. That's $2,200. You have $636 left. Time to study the patterns. Wealth multiplies through observation, not accident. This is your remaining capital. Now watch it grow. Utilities, electric, water, internet, $150. Phone, $80. A small investment. The beginning of growth. Every multiplier starts here. One decision, one step, pattern recognition begins. Observe, learn, multiplier. Clothing, hygiene, household basics, $100. Entertainment, emergencies, small buffer, $206. $206. You're at zero. And that's actually where the multiplication begins. Not from abundance, from nothing. Because zero means you have no bad patterns to unlearn. Zero means every decision from here multiplies your understanding. The wealthiest people didn't start rich, they started here. And what separated them from everyone else wasn't luck, it was pattern recognition. They studied what worked, they studied what failed, and they began to see the mechanics of wealth that most people never notice. You're about to become one of them. And this assumes you don't have student loan debt. This assumes you didn't have a medical emergency. This assumes you don't need to replace anything, tires, glasses, dental work. This assumes you live alone and have no dependents. This assumes you live in a $1,500 apartment. Now scale this a household of two, both making $65,000 combined income $130,000. That sounds like real money. After taxes for both $6,802 take-home combined. After all deductions, rent for a two-bedroom, $2,000 to $2,400. Call it $2,100. Groceries for $2,500. Essential expenses compound daily. Small costs, big patterns. 2 cars, $800 total, or $300 for transit. Choosing wisely matters, small decisions multiply. Pattern recognition in action. Utilities, $180. Utilities, another monthly expense reducing the available surplus. The diligent plan ahead. Phones, $140, essential communication tool for daily necessity and personal connection. Childcare. If you have kids, this is the number nobody talks about. $1,000 to $2,000 per month per child. That second $65,000 salary. It's being consumed almost entirely by the cost of the lifestyle that allowed the second person to work. If you have one child and need childcare, $6,802 income, minus $2,100 rent, minus $500 groceries, minus $800 cars, minus $180 utilities, minus $140 phones, minus $1,000 childcare. You have $1,882 left for everything else. Home maintenance insurance, property takes. If you own doctor visits, dental work clothes for growing children. School supplies, ze emergency fund, building a K-chul, investing, where you have $1,882 to KU ver K2 gories. That require $2,500 to $3,000 to stay stable. You're underwater and you're supposed to be diligent. You're supposed to be studying the patterns. You're supposed to be building wealth. So where does the Proverbs 21 promise actually work? Dual income, but not the way it's framed. When both people earn above $100,000, when you're already in the top 15% of income distribution, the math changes. Then pattern recognition and integrity start to compound into actual wealth. Or low-cost state $65,000 in Mississippi, with no state income tax, looks completely different than $65,000 in New York. Rent is $800. Suddenly you have breathing room. Or family wealth. You inherit money. Get family help with childcare. Have a down payment gift. The biblical principles then optimize the wealth you already have access to, or high-demand industry. You're a software engineer, a nurse specialist, a tradesperson in a booming region. $65,000 is the floor. You're actually making $95,000, $110,000, $130,000. Now the math works, but for the majority of people reading Proverbs 21 and believing it applies to their $50,000 to $70,000 salary, it doesn't. The system has changed the equation. Here's the paradox nobody articulates. You can follow every principle in Proverbs 21 perfectly. Be diligent, study success, maintain integrity, optimize your circle, and still experience financial stress because the foundational math doesn't allow for wealth accumulation at your income level, in your cost of living zone. The biblical principle is real, but it's been positioned as a solution to a problem it cannot solve in a modern economy with this structural inequality. This is why people feel guilty. They read Proverbs 21, they apply it, they do everything right, and they're still struggling. So they assume something is wrong with their application. They must not be disciplined enough. They must not be studying hard enough. They must not have the right circle. They blame themselves for a system failure. The system explanation is this. Proverbs 21 was written for a different economic structure. In an agrarian society with land ownership, apprenticeship, and direct trade, pattern recognition and integrity multiplied wealth because the return on effort was direct. You worked the land better, you harvested more, you built reputation, people came to you, you were diligent, you kept seed for next year. In a modern tax and wage economy, those principles still matter. but they're optimizing a smaller portion of the total outcome. Your payroll taxes and housing costs are fixed variables that no amount of pattern recognition eliminate. The wealthy don't follow Proverbs 21 to build wealth from zero. They follow it to optimize the wealth they already have access to. That's the operating system difference. Who actually can build wealth while following Proverbs 21 principles? This is the question that separates the wealthy from everyone else. And the answer isn't what you think. It's not about working harder. It's not about finding the perfect investment. It's about becoming a pattern recognizer. Someone who studies how others succeed and fail, then builds systems around those patterns. Proverbs 21 reveals 3 specific multipliers. Strategic relationships. You are the average of your closest circle, and their financial patterns become yours. Strategic timing. Preparation and cycles matter more than effort alone. And the long-term compounding mindset. Your system matters more than your hustle. The practical truth? Wealth multiplication follows understanding. When you observe, study, and align yourself with how prosperity actually works, it becomes mechanical, not magical. That's who actually builds wealth. Not the lucky ones. The pattern multipliers. First, dual income households where both earners are above regional median. Then the pattern recognition and integrity principles actually compound into visible net worth. Second, people in high demand fields where scarcity allows premium compensation. Your diligence and integrity attract the right clients and positions that pay exponentially more. Third, people who can relocate to low-cost regions. Your $65,000 salary becomes functionally equivalent to $95,000 in high-cost areas when rent is 40% instead of 60% of income. Fourth, people with inherited or family capital. The principles then work to expand existing wealth rather than create it from constrained income. Fifth, people who compressed their own timeline. They worked in high-income, high-cost areas, maintained extremely low spending, saved aggressively for 5 to 10 years, then relocated to lower-cost region. Their wealth compounded because they made a structural arbitrage decision, not because Proverbs 21 worked differently. Everyone else? The principles still apply, but their power is diminished by structural economic factors that exist outside the individual's control. Let's zoom out. You were promised a formula: study success, maintain integrity, be diligent. These are real principles. They work, but they're working inside an economy where a single-income household earning $65,000 is already losing money after housing and food. Where a dual-income household making $130,000 is barely breaking even if they have children. Where the cost structure has fundamentally changed since Proverbs was written, and the math, again. Take-home after taxes is $6,802 for a dual-income couple. Housing plus food plus transportation plus childcare for one child is approximately $4,400. That leaves $2,402 for utilities, insurance, medical, emergency, and wealth building. For most people, that's a monthly deficit. The principles don't bridge this gap. The Proverbs 21 illusion is that if you get the behavioral and relational factors right, the financial outcome will follow. In a modern economy, the behavioral factors matter. They matter a lot, but they're insufficient without either higher income, lower cost structure, or inherited advantage. If you're making that $65,000 salary, and you've been applying Proverbs 21 and still struggling, you're not failing the principle. The system is failing the promise. What you can actually do, recognize that wealth building at your current income-to-cost ratio is structurally constrained. That's not a failure of diligence. It's math. Then choose one of the actual levers: increase income above your current trajectory, decrease cost structure by relocating, or extend your timeline by accepting slower wealth building and focusing on what you can control, which is financial stability, not wealth multiplication. The integrity principle? That works regardless of income. The pattern recognition? That compounds over time regardless of bracket. But the wealth multiplication, the actual net worth building, requires structural advantage plus principles, not principles alone. If you want to actually use Proverbs 21 as a wealth tool and not a guilt mechanism, first identify your structural position. Then apply the principles to optimize that position, not to overcome it. That's where the real multiplication happens. If this reframing changed how you think about biblical financial principles versus economic reality, subscribe. We're going deeper into how ancient wisdom actually applies inside modern systems, and where it doesn't. In the comments, which layer of this taxes, cost of living, or structural inequality has affected your wealth building most? They are not grinding. They are compounding completely different muzzle. But the financial sell does you the grinding story. Work harder, hustle, more side projects. Second jobs, they sell you effort, because effort sells subscriptions and course the real multipliers. Operate KW at Lee in the background. Relay shunships timing systems. Pattern recognition observation. None of that rekioriers motivates hunul content. So it goes invisible. Here's the core truth underneath all of this. You can earn $100,000 and feel trapped, or earn $60,000 and feel abundant. The difference isn't income, it's pattern leader. See, if you understand how wealth systems actually work, if you've observed enough patterns to recognize what's coming, if your circle is aligned with wealth multiplication, then your income becomes almost irreal. Almost to your outcomes. You multiply inside the system instead of fighting it. Meanwhile, someone earning 3 times your income stays stuck. They never studied patterns, never aligned relationships, never built systems. They grinding in a broken loop predict ugly forever. Now here's who actually masters this principle: dual income. Households where both people study patterns independently, people from wealthy families who absorb this implicitly growing up, those in high-demand industries with constant peer learning built in, people in LOH cost geographic RXC, maximizing every dollars, people worry dollars, to undis uplined enough to join a mastermind group, but mostly it comes down to one thing: did you choose to observe or stay blind? That choice determines everything else that follows. Woos beak AKW's Proverbs 21 isn't magic, it's mechanics. When you study patterns, align relays hunships, build systems, wealth multiplies. Not instantly, but inevitable predictable. The timeline extends, but the destiny's hun becomes certain. Most people never reach that certainty, they stay in HOHB. Most people did achieve our people at to these apitrito. Over Paul just is the most back instrument. Hope that next promotion will feel different. It won't. Hope that more muni will solve system problems. It won't. Hope that hard work will somehow break the pattern. It won't. But when you understand the chul mechanics of wealth, when you've studied enough patterns to see clearly, when your relays hunships are rode with where you're going, when your systems are designed to compound automatically, then you stop hoping, you start knowing. That shift from hope to knowing changes everything. It's not arrogance. It's leader, a C pattern, eliter, a C. If you wanted to test this starting today, identify one person with financial results. You actually want. Study them like a case study doc. You meant 3 patterns. How do they think about money? What relays hunships matter? What decisions did they make? That you have VNT. Write it down. Make it a spific. Stay HB servant. Then look at your 5 C losest relays on ships. Honestly, are they aligned with where you actually want to go? If not, you don't need to cut them off. You need to expand your circle upward simultaneously. Join something, a mastermind, a Fed, investment club, a mentor relays hunship. You're not replacing people, you're increasing proximity. 2 pattern S or size, then implement one simple finance rule system. This month, 1 array, or you're currently re-kev instead, a systematic, Vincent EATW mate, it if PA Ozubble, let it KOM pound. KW Kedley. This is pattern multiplication beginning small, unglamorous, inevitable. Now hates people will read this and feel nothing. Changes, because they wording neote. Hope waiter. But if you actually do the C's 3 things, in 6 months, you'll not as your thinking has shifted. In 1 year, you'll not as your results have shifted. In 5 years, you'll barely recognize your financial life. Not BK Galwaz. You worked harder, BK Galwaz. You worked smarter. BK do as EU. Studied patterns before living them yourself. BKWZ, UCHOGs. Relays hunships, aligned with where you're heading. BKLBOZ, you built systems that compound while you sleep. That's what Proverbs 21 was AWLways, teaching KW Yetley. And that's what the wealthy understood and acted on. Now you understand it too. The question is simple as sim. Will you observe or keep hoping something changes? If this perspective shifted something for you today, subscribe. BK, we're building this leader CPs by Ps. By Ps, tell me in the comments which multiplier you're testing first. Relays hunships, timing systems, pick one start, you be serving. 2 days verving today.